And like I said, we have our top 10 dynasty wide receivers today. So, what I am going to do is just like last time, I've created a couple graphics. I'm going to pull up each one by one. So, we'll go wide receiver 1 through 10. It'll show yours and mine on the screen, and then we'll both talk about why we picked the guy there. So, let's just hop right into Dynasty wide receiver 1. And you and I both have the same guy here. It is Justin Jefferson as the Dynasty wide receiver 1. I will let you start off. Why are we choosing Justin Jefferson as the one?
I feel like he's just the preeminent wide receiver one in the NFL right now. You tried him out there, and you expect him to put up his numbers. There was a few games where he was a little iffy last season, but I think nobody will argue with you if you say that he's the wide receiver one. I really don't see who could even take his place at this point as the top wide receiver in the NFL.
Yeah, I agree. Andrew Bearclaw, Andy from the Dynasty League, he says they don't really have basketball over there, so he didn't even get to watch any of that stuff. So uh, fair enough. But I do agree with you when you say that. And quite honestly, um, I think there's only one other player that could even be mentioned this highly. But at the same time, I think Justin Jefferson is just proof of concept, right? Like he, all levels of the game is elite. Like there isn't a route he can't run. He's a PPR machine. I think this year he had like 170 targets. Like this guy, and he just chased that 2,000-yard season. Just fell a little bit short. He won the Offensive Player of the Year. There's just not a piece of Justin Jefferson's game that isn't elite. And I think just there's no reason why you don't want him on your team. He's my dynasty wide receiver 1. And I know Brandon might come in and have a little bit of bias and might have a little bit of difference to say. But look, man, I got the signed Justin Jefferson jersey on the
You
wall.
do.
This dude's elite, man. He's my favorite player in the
And
league.
look,
And
if
go
anybody
ahead.
watches this and they think that okay, Andrew is biased, he's a Vikings fan, no, because I'm a Bears fan. I have no reason to say anything nice about JJ. I should hate him, but I love the guy. He's a great wide receiver. What can I say? I wish he was a Bear. Like
Fair enough. Andy says JJ is the best. Wish he had him in a league with me. Just rubbing it in that he's on his team and not mine. Um, Tyson came in and said, "What's up?"
what's up,
Um,
Tyson?
what do you think about the game where JJ was awful for the fantasy playoffs? It is what it is. Honestly, I think at the same time, when you have guys like that, I don't I don't think there is a fantasy asset out there that is bulletproof.
No.
Everybody is going to have a game or two. Even guys like Josh Allen, right? Like Josh Allen will come out and he'll give you a game where he throws 3 interceptions, and you're like, "Damn, what happened to Josh this game?" And he finishes as the QB 11 or 12 on the week.
Yeah.
And you're just like, man, that wasn't a Josh Allen game. That's going to happen with guys like Justin Jefferson. That's going to happen with guys like Jamar Chase, Jonathan Taylor, all of these guys that are elite players at their position. So nobody's bulletproof. I would say it would worry me if those games were happening often, but those games happen every once in a blue moon. And so it's not really something that I'm worried about for Justin Jefferson as far as dynasty goes. And so that's why he's my wide receiver 1. We did have one question here. Would you trade all of your Bears starters for JJ War?
Everybody except Fields. Everybody except Fields. I will say this. I had JJ in redraft. I traded him. I won two
Yeah.
games that season. So so
Yeah.
I think the analytics lean in favor of JJ being the top wide receiver asset. Had I held on to JJ, I think I would at least have strung together at least 5 wins.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Fair enough. Uh, Andy says no one else counts except for Fields. There isn't anybody else. And you say yet because you guys have a whole bunch of cap space this offseason. So we'll see what you guys end up doing with it. But let's hop into wide receiver 2. And we kind of touched on him a little bit. We both have the same guy. Jamar Chase is our wide receiver 2 for Dynasty Fantasy Football. And give me the argument for Jamar Chase.
I mean, the argument for Jamar Chase is pretty much right up there with JJ as far as the reasoning. Jamar Chase is like, and the scary thing about Jamar Chase, as great as he's been, I feel like he hasn't even maximized his potential yet. I still feel like he's learning his way as a young guy in the NFL. He very well could be the number one wide receiver in the NFL here pretty soon. Really, him and JJ are neck and neck. It's just that JJ has the experience advantage and JJ has the production advantage. And I think not a spoiler, but the next person on my list is a part of the reason why JJ, I mean, is part of the reason why Chase can't be number one at this point in time.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. And I think just like you said, to me, the reason why Jamar Chase is number two and he's not number one is one, we have a little bit more proof of concept for JJ. He's been in the league 1 year longer, and we've seen it one more year. But uh Jamar Chase is one of those elite assets. I said on our last show that there was 4 assets in Dynasty Fantasy Football that I viewed as superstar assets. You cannot uh, deny those 4 guys, and that was Mahomes, Allen, JJ, and Chase. Those are my 4 guys. So he is up there. I just think for me, the reason why I also lean JJ over Chase is because of how they both score. Um, I prefer guys who have a little bit more consistent targets, a little bit more consistent production, have a little bit more things like that. So, um, JJ getting 170 targets and being that PPR monster, uh, Chase is more likely to have big plays, maybe less targets but more touchdowns. That's kind of the game of Jamar Chase. So that's why I lean him at number 2, JJ at number 1. And if I took the home team hat off, it would still be that same way for me. So that's why I go 1 and 2. And just like Andy is saying, he said number 3 is really where the debate of the top 10 wide receivers starts. So let's just get into number 3 here. You kind of hinted at it already, but Dynasty wide receiver 3, for me, I am going CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys. You are going wide receiver T. Higgins from the Cincinnati Bengals. So tell me why T. Higgins is wide receiver number 3.
There's some games, and if you're honest with yourself, there's some games where you see T. Higgins and Jamar Chase on the same field, and T. Higgins looks like the better wide receiver. So, by that logic, if the number 2 wide receiver who could potentially be number 1 shares the field with another wide receiver who looks better at times, there's a safe argument that he's the number 3 wide receiver at the very least. I factor in as well the potential for T. Higgins to be moved to a different team and be the alpha of that team. Hopefully, the Chicago Bears.
I was going
But
to say there's a team you hope he's going to.
yeah, and I just feel like the potential is there. Like there's some games where I've been because I've had T. Higgins on several teams before. There's some games where you're watching the Bengals and then you see somebody score like this amazing touchdown, and you're like, oh, okay, Jamar Chase. Wait, no, that's T. Higgins. And so I mean, I think T. Higgins really is that good. There's no shade on Amari Cooper, not Amari Cooper. See, there's no shade on CeeDee Lamb. Um, I'll get to CD, but I just feel like Joe Burrow is a better quarterback than Dak, and I feel like he could support 2 wide receivers more so than the one that Dak has. Like, I
Yeah,
think CD is really good. I feel like T. Higgins is just as good and could be great if he goes to a team that could pass the ball a little bit better. Not saying Fields is a better passer than Dak, but I'm just saying.
fair enough. Um, I think for me, and I want to answer this question that Andy threw in. He said, would you trade Chase and an early 23 second for JJ? And yes, I would trade both of those to go get JJ. And in fact, I think I did a similar deal. Maybe now the value is not there, but this last offseason, I traded Jamar Chase, Rashad Penny before Kenneth Walker had been drafted there. and something else for JJ. So I did make a similar deal this last offseason, so I would do that. Um, but for me, my wide receiver three was CeeDee Lamb. The reason why I go CeeDee Lamb here is one, age. And we're not really talking about age in comparison to T Higgins, but more so age compared to the rest of the pack. He's young as hell. I think he's just shown very elite traits at the wide receiver position. This last year, he did take that step up. We were looking for that step forward post Cooper leaving Dallas, and he did end up doing that. He finished as a top 5 PPR wide receiver this year for Dynasty Fantasy Football Leagues. 156 targets, 107 receptions, and almost 1,400 yards with just almost double digit touchdowns. He had 9. So for me, I think the ceiling is only going to get higher for CeeDee Lamb. I think there is opportunity for him to grow upon that. I don't see a situation where I could not see CD as possibly finishing next year in that top 3 fantasy wide receivers, and maybe even if things play out the way that they could, being for now, the lone option in Dallas. If they do get a little bit pass heavier, he could get that target volume and uh, those reception numbers that's going to help him finish really high. Maybe he could even be in the argument for a guy that could finish 2 or 3 at that point for me. I don't think he'll finish number 1, but he could get that high for me. So that's why I'm going to put him as wide receiver 3. And Brandon is in here and he's saying that Andrew could have CD, and that is true because we have went back and forth multiple times over the last couple days on a deal that would include me getting CD Lamb. Um, the only thing that it would require, which I told you this war, I would have to give up one of those assets that I said are superstar, untouchable assets, and he wants me to move
Uh,
Josh Allen. Um,
man,
so I'll say the deal. Honestly, if Brandon doesn't mind, I'll say the deal because I think it's a deal that we're not gonna end up doing right now. But it was gonna be CeeDee Lamb and Trevor Lawrence for Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs. So that was the deal. I don't know how you would feel about that deal, War.
like I said, I'm biased. 'Cause, CD, man. That like it's CD and Trevor Lawrence are the two players that I've criticized the most. Um, I don't know, man. That
He said
that's
War's
that's
face.
that's
Um,
a good deal depending on what phase your team is in. If your
yeah,
team is building, then I think absolutely you want to add Trevor Lawrence and CeeDee Lamb. If your team is contending,
competitive. Yeah.
yeah, then Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs is who should be on your team.
Yeah. And it's funny because it's a good deal. It's a fair deal because everybody kind of has to sit and think about it. Andy says it's a cool deal. Shane says he would take that deal. Andy says don't give up Allen, period. Tyson says he would take Lawrence and CD. So it's a mixed review. It's
Yeah,
it's everybody kind of has a different opinion. And I think that's what it comes down to, right? If
yeah,
you feel like, and the way that I was viewing it, and I haven't really, I think I talked a little bit like this about Brandon, and I don't want to get too far because this isn't like a trade review show or anything like that.
yeah,
But
yeah.
um, the way that I viewed it was, is the skill gap because I like to play with my teams in 2 to 3 year windows.
Hmm.
And so I don't really like looking too much further than 3 years out of the window because we can't really predict or project what's going to happen there. Um, so in this next 2 to 3 years, is the skill gap and the points per game gap between CeeDee Lamb and Stephon Diggs as big as it could be for Josh Allen and Trevor Lawrence? And to me, I think I would rather just have Josh Allen and Diggs in that 2 year window because I think Josh is going to outscore Trevor more than CeeDee will outscore Diggs.
I will tell you this. I think that I would question how Josh Allen will be as a player in 3 years. I will be worried about that. I will be less worried about Trevor Lawrence, because I feel like Trevor Lawrence is ascending. Trevor Lawrence doesn't take the type of hits that Josh Allen takes.
Hmm.
Stephon Diggs, he's already older and he's already not better than CeeDee Lamb. So, I mean, when you really think about it, I mean, it's kind of a good deal. Like, to be
It's a
honest,
great deal. It's a
it's
great
kind of a
deal.
good deal. I think a part of it, I think you love Stephon Diggs.
I
I
think I
think
think the part of it too is I love Josh Allen, and I told this
yeah,
to Brandon, and I kind of went on a rant with him the other day because I was like, there's sentimental value to me with Josh Allen. And it's because I believed in Josh when nobody believed in him. I was there as a Josh Allen truther before he broke out. And then he broke out. And then I won back to back dynasty championships with him on the roster. So
yeah.
there's this feeling of like, I picked the breakout, I saw it happen, and I benefited from it. So now I just want him to like retire on my damn roster.
But
And
you also got
so,
to know when to get out of that investment early. You got to
exactly.
trade them
So,
early.
it is great. And Andy is right. He said as the wide receiver 3 in my rankings, he is my wide receiver 3. CD is. Um, so it is a good point. It is a great deal, and I don't feel like we've seen the last of this deal in trade talks with me and Brandon, but it is something to think about. And because of that, I'm going to move on. But CD Lamb is my wide receiver 3, and T Higgins is your wide receiver 3. Let's get to wide receiver number 4. For you, you have CD Lamb. And for
Yeah.
me, I have AJ Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles. So you said you haven't been an advocate of CD Lamb, but he's number 4 on your list. Tell me why.
I can't drop. Look, despite what I've said about CeeDee Lamb, and a part of it is Brandon will tell you. Part of it is if you're on my team and you don't produce, I basically at a particular time I hold it against you forever. So I had CD on the team before. He didn't produce. So I still hold it against him, but I can't drop him any lower than 4 in dynasty
Mhm.
rankings. Like maybe I could make that argument if this was just wide receiver rankings in general, drop him lower. But in dynasty, I mean, he's young. He's young and he's really, really good. So I mean, it would be laughable for me to drop him like any lower than 4th. And really, it was a risk putting him at him and Higgins could have even switched places. I just believe in Higgins' ceiling, and I believe in what I've seen from Higgins as the number 2 on the Bengals. So I mean, yeah, CD, I can't drop him any lower than 4. No.
Yeah, fair enough. And for me, I think AJ Brown is my wide receiver 4 because one, he's paired up with Jalen Hurts, who we just talked about as one of the elite fantasy quarterback options for the next couple of years. So there's that pairing there. I know he has Devontae Smith on the other side, but AJ Brown has shown that he is capable of scoring regardless who is on the team. There was a couple games this year where he had 2, and even sometimes I think there was one time he had 3 touchdowns in a game this year, and he has the ability to go do that. I think he's a little bit better than people give him credit for from a consistency standpoint. I know some people view him as a boom bust. Maybe he gets, maybe he's only a guy that you want when he scores a touchdown, but I think he's better than that at times. So for me, I think I'm going to go AJ Brown with that wide receiver 4. And just after this wide receiver 4, this is where I text you and I told you this is where it really got hard for me because to me, those 4, it was a tier of JJ and Chase, and then I had a tier of CD and AJ. And now my rankings got really scrambled and it gets confusing for me.
Our rankings have been primarily somewhat the same up to this point, and now it's just going. It's about to just go completely left.
Yeah. Yeah. So now here's where we're going to be able I'm looking at this. Hold on. What is this? By Ward's argument, Devontae Smith should be Andrew's wide receiver 5. Oh, because of the Chase and T. Higgins thing. So maybe no. I won't
Devonta is
spoil
no
it, but
T Higgins.
Devontae might or might not show up on my list today, but we'll see. But let's get into the wide receiver 5s because we said this is where it's going to start getting a little bit. Um, Actually, look, it's not. I'm going to pull it up, man. It's not going to get crazy. T. Higgins is my wide receiver 5. AJ Brown is your wide receiver 5. So tell me why you have AJ at 5. I'll tell you why I have T. But it's pretty much talking more of the same, in my opinion.
Yeah, just pretty much piggybacking off of what you just said. Um, I won a redraft on the back of AJ Brown coming off of an injury before, so I'm definitely pro AJ Brown. Yeah, he can be boom or bust sometime, but those booms are really big booms. Like he can
Crazy.
single-handedly win the game for you. He's good. He's done this despite a top tier number two being on the team. Yeah, and I think AJ Brown definitely deserves to be up in the top five for sure.
Yeah, and for me, I'm keeping T. Higgins number 5 because it's kind of tapping into what you've already said, man. But I can't get him too much lower. I think you could argue a couple guys here, but I ended up ultimately going with T. Higgins here because I think that he has shown that he is capable of getting his next to what we describe as some of the elite assets in fantasy football. And when you have a guy who can stand next to a Justin Jefferson / Jamar Chase level of player, that's when I'm willing to say they're the real deal. So I think T. Higgins, I would have him there. I do think, like you said, there is a possibility here down the future. That he ends up finding a new home. And I think if T. Higgins does become a wide receiver 1 for a roster, depending on where he goes, the ceiling could be unlimited. So I know we have some T. Higgins fans in the chat. I know we have some people who maybe aren't T. Higgins fans in the chat, but I know that Andy is a T. Higgins guy. And I know he said that really there isn't a place that he goes that he doesn't think he's going to be good. So that should kind of tell you a little bit about how the community views him. And T. Higgins is going to be my wide receiver 5 for fantasy football. But 6 through 10, this is where it gets a little bit more scattered, probably after 6, because you and I have the same guy. And wide receiver 6 is going to be Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins. And I haven't even looked at the chat, but I know that Brandon is going to be in here outraged that we would pick Jalen Waddle as the wide receiver 6 in Dynasty Fantasy Football. But you tell me why you would go Jalen Waddle as number 6.
Jalen Waddle, he's just like it's sentimental, just like it was with you and Josh Allen. From day one, I said Jalen Waddle was that dude. Nobody wanted to believe me. Nobody wanted to respect me saying that Jalen Waddle was that dude. Jalen Waddle is better than Devonta. Jalen Waddle is that dude, man. And when Tyreek Hill leaves, Jalen Waddle is going to become an even more massive fantasy asset. He's already doing that with one of the greatest wide receivers of all time on a roster next to him. One of the greatest of all time. You understand? AJ Brown, AJ Brown, if we're just talking wide receivers altogether, AJ Brown, I don't feel like he's yet eclipsed Tyreek Hill. Jalen Waddle's doing this with an even better wide receiver on the team than Devonta. Um, and I just think Jalen Waddle's just amazing. Like, really, if it wasn't for certain factors, the quarterback, and Tyreek being on the team, Jalen Waddle could even challenge to be higher. But right now, that's where I have Jalen Waddle.
Yeah, and I also have Jalen Waddle here as the wide receiver 6, and the reason why I have him here is because I've seen Jalen Waddle win in multiple ways at the NFL level now. Last season when he was without Tyreek Waddle, he was I what last season when he was without Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Waddle, could you imagine that player, dude?
Oh
Um,
man. Oh man.
But last season, before Tyreek Hill was on the roster, he had 140 targets with 104 receptions for 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns. So he was winning the game at they were shortening the field. He was winning it in a PPR way. He was catching a lot of passes, and he was able to do it that way. This year, he still had 100 plus targets. He had 117 targets with 75 receptions. Now the receptions come down, but I think that was given because we knew that Tyreek Hill was going to come in. They paid him to be the wide receiver one. He came in to be that top target. But what they did is that kind of opened up the field for Jalen Waddle. Jalen Waddle then exploded for almost 1,400 yards, and he had 8 touchdowns this year. So keep in mind, wide receiver 13 as a rookie, wide receiver 8 when they bring in Tyreek Hill. So he got better, or he finished better when Tyreek Hill was on the roster. I think it's not necessarily a negative to have Tyreek Hill on the opposite side of the field from him. Maybe it brings some of the consistency and the target volume down a little bit, but I think that Jalen Waddle is a freak athlete that's able to go out and score a touchdown from anywhere on the field. It doesn't really matter where he catches it. And as long as Tyreek Hill is there, I'm not necessarily worried about Jalen Waddle. He's young as hell. He's 24 years old. I know some people are worried about Tua Tagovailoa. I am not worried about Tua right now. People think that the concussions are going to force him to retire and things like that. Look, man, there have been guys in the NFL who have had more concussions than Tua Tagovailoa that played 12 years in the NFL. So I am not necessarily worried about Tua at this point. Now, if next year Tua comes in and he misses a bunch of games with concussions, maybe we get a little bit worried. But as of right now, I'm not worried about it. Jalen Waddle is going to be my wide receiver 6. I can see Brandon's argument about where he's saying he doesn't get the target volume, and I think that just becomes a preference of how you like to build your dynasty teams. But to me, at the end of the day, I care about scoring fantasy football points. And if you can bring in Jalen Waddle, and he's one of the few guys that has the ability to go in and win you a single week by himself. I mean, he did it multiple times this year. I had him on my redraft team, and he had a 40-point week 2. He had a 30-point week 8. He had a 30-point week 16. Like, he has the ability to go in and blow up and win you a big game. So for me, that's why he's my wide receiver 6. And unless there's anything else we can argue about Jalen Waddle, because we both just had the same guy, I think we should just move on to wide receiver 7.
All right.
All right. So for me, wide receiver 7 is Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets. And for wide receiver 7 for you, you got DK Metcalf of the Seattle Seahawks. Tell me why you're going DK Metcalf as wide receiver 7.
I don't know why. It feels like we're forgetting about DK Metcalf.
I'm going to be
I,
honest. Look, spoiler alert, he didn't make my top 10 list, and I felt really weird about not having him. I was debating on making him number 10 just so he made the list, but it does feel like we're forgetting about DK, and I don't want to be disrespectful to DK, but he's not on my list. But tell me why he's 7 for you.
he's 7 for me because I feel like right now he has a steady floor quarterback in Geno Smith. I feel like Geno Smith could sustain him being a relevant fantasy asset long enough for them to get an even better quarterback. I wouldn't say the problem with DK is this. This is why DK wasn't higher on the list. We've seen what DK can do when he's had an elite. Well, it feels weird calling Russ elite at this point, but when he had an elite quarterback, DK Metcalf is what, 24 years old, 24, 25 years old. He still has like 8 to 10 years left in his career. I feel like that's long enough for him to get a quarterback and still use his raw physical tools to beat people. Um, DK Metcalf, he's just a freak of nature, and he'll produce somewhat long enough to get things figured out on the quarterback side of it. And that's pretty much where I am with DK. And yeah, he would have been higher on this list. But the thing is that unlike some of the other guys on the list, he's not quarterback proof. He's just not. He has an average quarterback, so he's going to be slightly above average. He's not going to be great, but he'll be slightly above average. But he has the potential still to be great.
Yeah, fair enough. And quite honestly, it's funny because as you're talking, you said he's not quarterback proof. I would argue that he might be. And I think when you go out and you ball like he did this year with Geno, um, you're pretty much damn quarterback proof. Because is Geno Smith really like that? I don't think so. I know Shane is a big Geno guy, but I think it's just the Seahawks blue and green that's bleeding through. But
His
Geno
floor is
Smith,
raised.
Geno Smith, I think looks better because he's playing with guys like DK and Tyler Lockett.
Yeah.
But this is blasphemy, I think, that I just saw that Shane put in here. He said if you offered me Higgins for DK, I'd decline it. I think that's outrageous that you would just a straight up trade Higgins for DK. I'm taking Higgins all day long.
If anybody, and I mean if anybody in gamblers feels that way about DK Metcalf, please send me T Higgins right now for DK Metcalf, and I will instantly hit accept.
Well, here's the problem. Here's the problem. Shane is not in that league, so we don't have Seahawks fans in there. Uh, but I do want to talk about my guy, man, Garrett Wilson. And I saw Brandon giving me some flack in here for it. But look, dude, Garrett Wilson looks like a freaking superstar. I love Garrett Wilson. I loved Garrett Wilson coming out. He was my wide receiver one in the class, and he goes out to a New York Jets team that, keep in mind, had Zach Wilson, Mike White, and a bundle of other bums starting for them this year at the quarterback position. And he goes out and he finishes this year as a top 20 fantasy wide receiver as a rookie, has 150 targets and 1,100 yards. Now, I know that the touchdowns were low, but I would say that that is because of the offense, not because of the player. That was just having the quarterback there. I fully expect a quarterback upgrade for Garrett Wilson this offseason. Whether that's going to be Derek Carr, Jimmy Garoppolo, Aaron Rodgers, I'm not sure, but I would fully expect one of them to go be there. And if one of those guys there, it's wheels up for Garrett Wilson to me. And I think Garrett Wilson is going to be able to enter a whole nother tier. He's going to jump this ranking. He's going to end up being top 5 to me if he ends up getting a quarterback upgrade and has the ability to do that. So Garrett Wilson, I'm a big fan of Garrett Wilson. I want to be buying Garrett Wilson everywhere. It is what it is, man. He's my wide receiver 7 here. So I don't know. Shane says, why are we gaslighting him? I don't know, man. But let's see. I want to pull up. I'm glad we have a lot of chat going on in our comments, and some of it is hard for me to even keep up with at this point, but I'm glad we have it. Let's go to wide receiver 8, and we're gonna stay somewhat familiar on your end. Garrett Wilson is your wide receiver 8. So I had him at 7, you had him at 8, and I'm going to put Stephon Diggs over there as wide receiver 8 on the other side. I mean, what do you want to echo about Garrett Wilson?
The more I think about it, I'm just sick to my stomach that I traded Brandon Garrett Wilson for Jameson Williams. If he thinks Garrett Wilson sucks, then please let's redo that trade. You can have Jameson back. Give me Garrett Wilson if you haven't traded him already. I just think it was like super foolish of me to do that. I see the same things you've seen. I've seen a guy produce with trash, and now he's in line to get an even better quarterback. I don't really see there's hesitance because he's a New York Jet. That's
Mm,
really what it is. I have Jet doubt, and I know some of you guys have Bears doubt, which is why you
yeah.
say silly things like, "Oh, those Fields can't throw. They get a wide receiver. They still won't be good." But that's how I feel about the New York Jets. So when you see someone in the Jets jersey, there's instant doubt coming from my end because it's like, how long before they screw everything up like they always do? But if I just take it at face value, look at what he's done, looking at the potential to add an even better quarterback, I can't not have Garrett Wilson in the top 10. I just can't.
Fair enough. And I've already said I there's some people in here. Shane says Diggs is too old to be here.
Yep.
Um
That's
Brandon
what.
says y'all mother effers tripping. Um at the end of the day, man, look, I'm going to defend Stephon Diggs here because I know a lot of people don't believe that he should be in this top 10, but I do not play Dynasty fantasy football as an ageist, like some of you do. And at the end of the day, I look at this in 2 to 3 year windows, and Stephon Diggs has the type of game that is going to age like fine wine. He's a route runner. He's not somebody who's taken a lot of big hits. If you watch the film, he actually is really good at getting down. He's not taking a big hit, or maybe he's making a guy miss and he's able to shed off some of the contact that's coming with the tackle. But Stephon Diggs, man, elite route runner. There's really just no reason at all why he can't be in here for another 2 years. Why are we willing to take him out of the top 10 when all we have to do is keep him here when he's finished here 4 out of 5 years in a row? He's been a top 10 wide receiver 4 out of 5 years. He's tied to Josh Allen. We just said you do not trade Josh Allen, period. We just said that. Why are we going to trade or downgrade Stephon Diggs outside of a top 10 for what I would consider some of the next guys that we have coming up as wide receiver twos on their own goddamn team? Stephon Diggs is the wide receiver one on his team, and they can't even find a goddamn wide receiver two. So we need to not downgrade Stephon Diggs and be fantasy football ageist when he's done this. Wide receiver 3, wide receiver 7, wide receiver 4. Like there's no reasons why we should be downgrading him. So that is my rant for Stephon Diggs. He does not need to come out of the top 10. Anyways,
Andrew, PSA. Stephon Diggs is no longer a Minnesota Viking. You do not have to cape for him this hard. He's gone.
we do not.
Okay.
We just do
Look,
not need to be disrespectful.
look, look. Some could argue that Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs are two potentially declining assets tied to each other. You could make that argument. One gets hit too much and was a little shaky towards the end of the season, and other is an aging wide receiver. Stephon Diggs still has years to be good. And if this was like just regular wide receiver rankings for fantasy football, Stephon Diggs would be a lot higher than a lot of the players that are on the list. But we're talking dynasty. We're talking assets that are ascending, not assets that are descending.
This is not a wide receivers under the age of 25 list. This is the top 10 assets at the wide receiver position in Dynasty Fantasy Football. If you pulled up a startup draft today, Stephon Diggs would be in that top 10. You would not draft Stephon Diggs in that top 10 at the wide receiver position.
What if we were doing a startup?
Yes.
Well, Andrew, you're talking to me here.
Maybe you, but I'm saying if we pulled up startup, I'm going to do it right now. Look, now you got me on it. If we pulled up a startup draft right now, Stephon Diggs does not find his way outside of that top 10. And if he does, he's 11. Like, there's no way he's not going to be up there. So let's see. I pull up a startup draft because I'm about to start one here in this other league. And
is it a dynasty startup?
It is a dynasty startup.
Okay.
And that's what I'm talking about. When you're doing a dynasty startup, these are my top 10 wide receivers, right? And so wide receiver 1 is Justin Jefferson, Chase, Lamb, AJ, Waddle. It almost sounds familiar to exactly what we just put out there. Then Tyreek Hill is there. Then Amon-Ra St. Brown and Stephon Diggs. Stephon Diggs is wide receiver 8 in startup rankings. This is not blasphemous for me to have him as the wide receiver 8.
Nobody said it was blasphemous, Andrew.
People in the chat are talking wild.
Well, okay, I can't see that, but yeah, that. So, I mean, I guess I might be a little ageist when it comes to fantasy football.
Y'all are ageist, man. Even look, Marshall just said, Brandon, you took Diggs in our recent startup over some of these guys. You took Diggs in a draft. So do not come in here talking about I'm ageist or you guys are not ageist. Come on, man. It is not blasphemous to talk about Stephon Diggs. But I'm going to get off of the Stephon Diggs
they really going to be mad in a second.
Because they're going to be really mad when they see who I pull up next. And wide receiver number 9, Tyreek motherfucking Hill, bro. I got Tyreek Hill here, wide receiver 9, and you got Devontae Smith. So tell me why Devontae Smith lands in your top 10.
He's in top 10 because despite what I said earlier, Devonta Smith is still a really good, really good wide receiver. I do question that if AJ Brown wasn't there and he was the primary target, if he had to take some of the hits and had a lot of the best defenders directed at him, I do wonder what he did because like he barely hit 1,000 yards in his rookie season. Um, but he's still young. He's still really good, and I feel like he's going to continue to be good for the foreseeable future, health permitted.
Fair enough. Um, Tyson says, "Where's Amon Ra though?" Andrew, I'm gonna play spoiler for you, Tyson. He's not gonna be on today's show. Um, and then,
Which is real. Look,
and Shane says, "Ageist is the most acceptable ist you can be." Um, but And Brandon says, "Yeah, I'm taking Diggs over both of those all day." He said T. Higgins and Devontae Smith. So Brandon took him over Devontae Smith and T. Higgins, and then he's calling me blasphemous for having Stephon Diggs on this last. Come on, man. But at the end of the day, I'm taking Tyreek Hill here. Like I said, I'm looking at this as a startup 2 to 3 year window. Tyreek Hill is 28 years old. He's going to be, I mean, he just finished as like the wide receiver 2 in fantasy football. He's in an offense where McDaniel is going to be able to get the most out of him. He clearly wants to make him the focal point of the offense. And for me, that's why I'm having it there to have Tyreek Hill as my wide receiver 9 in fantasy football. Again, people for some reason start fading wide receivers after the age of like 26. I was doing some research and some data here in the last couple months, honestly, where I was looking at like fall off rates and cliffs and see where things are at as far as certain positions. And for the average wide receiver, it usually doesn't come until the end of their age 29 season, which I know that's a year away for Tyreek, and that's this year for Diggs. But keep in mind, I'm saying that is your average wide receiver to fall off. These are not average assets. These are I mean, earlier in the show, you talked about Tyreek Hill as one of the greatest wide receivers that we've seen in the last while. So these are above average assets. We've seen guys like Devontae Adams, who's going to be 31 years old. He is still finishing top 10. So to tell me that Stephon Diggs and Tyreek Hill, who are 28 and 29, can't go 2 more years or 3 more years and finish top 10 like Devontae Adams has been, that's ridiculous. These guys are going to be elite assets for your fantasy football teams, and you can be scared of the age all you want, but if you want to win fantasy football games and you want to play dynasty fantasy football where the goal is to win championships and not just draft young guys, you need to eventually go in and need to get guys who are going to win you the goddamn games. And to me, that's what Tyreek Hill and Stephon Diggs are. So that is why Stephon Diggs is 8, Tyreek is 9, and I didn't go for a younger wide receiver like Devontae Smith or Amon-Ra St. Brown or some of the other guys that have been brought up. But Brandon says he just doesn't like Higgins at all. And he says, I'm blasphemous for Garrett Wilson, not Diggs. He thinks I'm crazy for going Garrett Wilson. You know what? We're both high on Garrett Wilson, and I think Garrett Wilson has the ability to do. I think his career trajectory is going to be nuts. You see this damn cat, bro. But anyways, Marshall says, "Where is the forgotten GWOAT, greatest white of all time? Is that what that is?" Cooper Cup. And then Dubridge says, "Isn't Diggs turning 45, just younger than Brady, if I remember correctly?" Yeah, that's the way that everybody's acting. They're acting like Stephon Diggs just turned 57 this year, and he's falling off. So not on them damn Jets. Tyson says, "Luna, it's your uncle." But let's get to the last wide receiver on the list, man. Do you have anything that you want to argue about Tyreek?
no.
This
but
show is
but
getting off
but
the rails,
but
bro.
but
I'm
the but
sorry.
the more the name Amon Ra keeps coming up, the more I start feeling guilty about him not being in the top 10. Because my next two, full disclosure, because we're on the last two picks, right?
Yeah. No,
So
we're gonna be
full
on the last one.
okay, full disclosure. I agonized over who to put here. Like I had
I did too.
four,
I
I had
really
like
struggled with 10.
I had like 5 players that I wanted to put here, and Amon was one of them. And I'll break it all down. Okay, go ahead, Andrew.
Man, it is getting hot and sweaty in this room. I'm not gonna lie. I feel like I'm just worked up over this shit. Um, bro finished 7 in PPR. I think he's talking about Amon-Ra St. Brown. But goddamn. Okay, so wide receiver 10 for you, bro. You went Chris Olave from the New Orleans Saints, and I went Devontae Smith for the Eagles. So tell me why Chris Olave is number 10.
Okay, I have to break it all down about why certain players aren't here and why certain players are here. Here's the thing. Here's the thing. Chris Olave is more than likely getting a decent quarterback this season. I mean, I thought it would be Derek Carr, but we'll see now. Like we'll see now, because that definitely factored into my thinking. He's gonna be he's gonna be the wide receiver one for that team for this season. Michael Thomas will not be a New Orleans Saint at the start of next season. So
No,
Chris Olave will be that dude. In turn, Detroit Lions, Goff. Is he going to play the same exact way that he played last season? I have no clue. I have no clue at all if he's going to play that way. But let's not act like there's not a wide receiver with a higher ceiling on the same team with Amon-Ra St. Brown. We have to forget that. Jameson Williams is an actual existing player. He's an actual existing player. So I feel like that'll take away some of what Amon could do. Had Jameson been healthy all season, then it probably already put a dent into Amon's status as a top 10 wide receiver, you know. And then the other player I was thinking about putting here was Drake London, but there's just too much going against him for this spot. You got the presence of Kyle Pitts. I feel like the Falcons are the least likeliest team to get an upgraded quarterback. They'll probably end up with Ryan Tannehill or something. Um, yeah, and that's pretty much it. I think Chris Olave will have the best opportunity with the least going against him this season coming up. Kind of very similar, well, not similar to Garrett Wilson, but similar to if T. Higgins were moved to a different team and was by himself,
yeah, fair enough.
but not as
Well,
good.
I look, man. Uh, he says, I think we need to make War the new U.S. president. Talks a lot of sense. Uh, Shane, I wanted to talk about this. Shane says Amon-Ra 4th rounder. I still don't trust it. Tyson gives it a thumbs up. Brandon says good point, Shane. And I want you guys.
My point is
I
his
want you
brother
guys.
is equal St. Brown. That's another
Okay,
negative against
but
Simon.
but I do want to bring up the fact that if we were going off of here's my opinion here. You can use draft capital as a way in your rookie drafts to decide between two different guys. I think you can use draft capital for that. When you have a guy who comes in who had late draft capital and shows you that that was wrong, that the draft capital was wrong, do not use that draft capital as an argument anymore. Stephon Diggs was drafted as a 5th-round wide receiver. Tyreek Hill was a 6th-round wide receiver. There are guys in the NFL who were drafted poorly. Scouts got it wrong. Scouts get it wrong, just like us. When we go in and we say, okay, Amon-Ra's a 4th rounder, I don't trust it anymore, he has shown us that he is not a 4th-round talent. Amon-Ra was a 1st-round wide receiver talent, and he didn't get drafted there. That's just the way it is. Do not use that to discount Amon-Ra anymore. Now, with that being said, he's not in my top 10. But I do want to say that Devontae Smith is in my top 10. And Devontae Smith is an elite talent for me. I think the only reason why I have him down here uh, is because I think that when I was looking at it, and I know we have multiple guys who it's just a weird year, I think, for me when I'm looking at wide receivers, because there's guys like Chase and Higgins, where both of those guys make the top 10. And then I had Waddle and Hill, where both of those guys made my top 10. And then I had guys like A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith that make my top 10. But I think when I was looking at it, it was who is the first option and then who is the second option. And Devontae Smith sneaks into my top 10. He's one of those guys that if he was the wide receiver one on another team, he would be a lot higher on this list than where he is right now for me. But because he has AJ Brown that came in on the other side, and at the end of the day, I'm going to take some of those guys that are the wide receiver one on their team and are producing at that aspect over a guy who's the wide receiver two on his team. Devontae Smith is super talented. I don't want to discredit anything that we're saying. Um, these are still top 10 wide receivers for us. It's not like we're talking about wide receiver 30. We're talking about the top 10. All of these guys we would draft as a wide receiver one on our fantasy football teams. So I think that's what it is going to come down to for me. That's why he's my number 10. I think a couple guys that got honorable mentions that I was looking at here I was looking at Cooper Kupp. I was looking at DK Metcalf, and I was looking at Chris Olave when I was looking at these picks. So that's what I was looking at. Andy says, does draft capital matter after 3 years? Probably not. Have to agree with Andrew. So that's where things are at. Do you have anything to say about the list? I know this show got really passionate and crazy towards the end, but is there anything to say about our top 10 list? He says, was DK even 11th for you, Andrew? Yeah, he was. And in fact, here, you guys want to see the list. I'll show you the list. I'm gonna open up a new tab. But you tell me, War, what are your thoughts about our list? Where do you think, are there any honorable mentions for you either?
I pretty much laid all of them out. In some order, it would have been the next picks would have been some order of Drake London, Amon Ra, and okay, we do need to talk about this really quick. Andrew, repeat your statement that you told to me about James, because I know Brandon's going to have a fit about Jameson Williams, where you would have had him ranked if you were ranking him. Then you say you wouldn't have him higher than 18th.
Yeah, JMO's not even cracking my top 20 right now, man. I don't think so.
I think you need to respect that kid a little bit more. Just a
Me?
little bit more. Yeah. Yeah, just a
I
little
mean,
bit more. The
look,
potential
man,
is high. The potential is high.
what are we going off of? Like, are we going off of the 2 catches that he got this year?
The
Like, what
potential
are
is
we
high, Andrew.
Okay, so we're going off of potential. What do I have that is actually critical and concrete that I can show you of why he belongs there?
His
I don't
age
know. I'm not saying that
and
he's a bad player.
potential.
He's not a bad player. Um,
He would have been possibly
can
the
you guys
high.
see this?
Okay,
Can you see this? So here's my wide receiver rankings, guys. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. These players were the players that I was debating in this last tier right here. So you see DK, Michael Pittman Jr., Cooper Kupp, Chris Olave, Amon-Ra St. Brown. These are guys that I was debating. Was considering some of these guys, but 31-year-old Adams. I just went to bat for an older guy, but 29 and 31 is very different to me. And who's playing quarterback here? I don't know. This is Josh Allen. Like, that's the difference to me. But those are the guys that I was talking about. You guys see them. Um, I'm not going to share that screen with you much longer, but that's where I was at. So you wanted proof, was DK even in the consideration? Yeah, he was in my consideration. And Brandon's right. He says JMO has to be treated as unranked. Unranked. You cannot rank him right now.
I think he'll do good this year. I think he'll do good. I think he'll prove you guys wrong. He'll be ranked next year.
We'll see. We'll see.